Introduction. From his jail cell, he could see the blue skies and the horizon. That was about the only redeeming feature about Robben Island. His cell was 8 feet by 7 feet and contained no plumbing. It was constantly damp. This is where he lived at night. During the day, he worked on the limestone, which would permanently damage his eyesight from the glaring sun. It was in the Robben Island prison that he spent 18 of his 27 years in jail as a political prisoner. He would acquire tuberculosis and was not allowed regular outside correspondence except once every 6 months. While imprisoned, he wasn't even allowed to attend his son's funeral when his son died in a car crash in 1969. He was physically and emotionally abused during his imprisonment. Why? Because he believed he deserved equal rights as a black man in South Africa during apartheid. While his physical and emotional health may have suffered, Nelson Mandela's spirit was strong. He refused to bow to his captors. They could take his clothes, they could force him to work, they could emotionally and physically abuse him. Yet Mandela recognized that his mind was the one thing that he and he alone could control. He refused to be the victim in a situation that would see most people crumble. Mandela refused to give up control of what mattered most, his will. Nelson Mandela continued to study. He taught others what he learned. Throughout his imprisonment, he remained singularly focused on his anti-apartheid mission. After 27 years as a political prisoner, Nelson Mandela was released in 1990. He then led negotiations with the African National Congress to end apartheid. 3 years later, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. And in 1994, over 20 million South Africans turned out to cast ballots in the first ever multiracial elections. Nelson Mandela won an overwhelming majority of the votes on his way to becoming the first ever non-white president of South Africa, a position he held from 1994 until 1999. For most, becoming the victim of a bad situation is all too easy. We let our tormentors control much more than our emotional and physical wellness. We also relinquish control over our minds. We cease to be autonomous beings. What Nelson Mandela realized is that it is our God-given right to choose how we see our reality. We see this in the now infamous Stanford prison experiment, where the students were randomly selected to either be a jailer or a prisoner in a role-playing scenario. After a very short period of time, the jailers started to abuse the prisoners. In turn, the prisoners started to assume a victim mentality. That is how they saw their reality. Even though it was just a role-playing experiment, it had to be stopped due to the harm the jailers caused to the prisoners. Yet Mandela didn't allow his captors to control his mind or the perspective, paradigm, or narrative his mind produced. Even in a real-life prison experiment, Mandela continued his agenda of ending racism on all accounts in order to have a multiracial South Africa that was at peace. As he left prison, Mandela recounted, "As I walked out the door toward the gate that would lead to my freedom, I knew if I didn't leave my bitterness and hatred behind, I'd still be in prison." How was Mandela able to do this in a real prison situation when the Stanford prisoners in the experiment could not? It's all about perspective. There is no there. We were standing in the fairway on the second hole of the West Golf Course at the Bermuda Run Country Club when it happened. My friend Mike and I were getting out to play a quick 9 holes with the hopes of taking a break from our busy work lives and watching our kids. I was also trying to escape my raging case of burnout. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. It started that morning. I had been taking a prescription medication called propranolol since being diagnosed with an essential tremor. A neurology resident had noticed the tremor while I was actually performing a lumbar puncture as a third-year medical student. As I went to open the bottle, I realized I'd forgotten to refill my prescription. I fulfilled the truism that doctors make the worst patients. No big deal, I thought. I'll fill my propranolol later. I'll be golfing. This will be a super low-key day. Who cares if my hands shake a bit? Nothing a beer or two can't fix. And I was right. Missing out on the propranolol wasn't a big deal. At least, not at first. Mike and I were standing in the fairway on the second hole when the group behind us drove their ball from the tees. Hearing the noise, I looked back just in time to see a little white blur flying about 100 miles per hour past my head. That's when it happened. The palpitations were sudden, my heart felt like it was in my throat, and my entire face was flushed. This was fight or flight in the most severe form I had ever experienced. Everything in my body told me that I was in mortal danger. I was experiencing my first panic attack. For the uninitiated, teeing a golf ball into the group ahead while they're within reach of your drive is a big no-no in golf. A golf ball flying 100 miles per hour can do much more than break a window pane. It can also cause major trauma to anyone standing in the way. This is why you never tee off when someone's standing in the fairway. It's like firing a gun down range and hoping that you don't connect with the person who happens to be standing in the way. As the ball slowly rolled to a stop, my emotions went through the roof. That is when I turned to Mike and said, I'm going to need you to handle this when they come down here. I can't control my emotions right now. I'm an otherwise cool, calm, and collected kind of guy, particularly in stressful situations. This serves me well in medicine because it turns out that no one likes an anesthesiologist who cannot keep their cool when the shit hits the fan. So when my body went into DEFCON 1 due to a tiny, white, circular object that didn't even hit me, I knew immediately something was wrong. It is all just stress, right? Let's back up a bit and put this in perspective. Then we can zoom in on my journey through burnout to connect the dots and how that led to my experience on the second hole of the Bermuda Run golf course. When I first became a coach for burned out physicians, someone pointed me to a personality test called the Enneagram. While controversy exists over the validity of the Enneagram, I personally found it helpful. After taking the test, it told me that I was a Type 3, Wing 2 on the Enneagram, what is known as an achiever or charmer. I learned that my life is about productivity and accomplishments. In other words, I need to achieve in order to be happy. Type 3 personalities tend to be self-assured, confident, and driven by ambition. We're the sort of people that are commonly asked, how do you get everything done? Type 3s care very much about what other people think, which proves problematic since our self-worth comes from accomplishments, accolades, and achievements. After taking the test, it didn't take long for me to see that this insatiable appetite for achievement in my own life. In college, I was named the E.B. Kennedy Scholar after winning one of 2 full-ride scholarships offered by Erskine College, following a rigorous multi-day in-person interview process involving hundreds of high school students. While in medical school at Wake Forest, I was elected the class president and then the student body president, and during residency, I was elected one of 2 chief residents. After training, I was earning $500,000 a year, winning teaching awards in record fashion, and publishing multiple peer-reviewed randomized control trials in my first year as an attending. I was also running a successful 6-figure business. I was the host of 2 5-star podcasts, the Philosopher and Money Meets Medicine podcasts, which I previously hosted with my friend Ryan Inman, and even authored a successful book teaching personal finance to physicians. My teaching evaluations were stellar, and I was a pretty good clinician too. I checked every box of a Type 3 Enneagram. I won the big awards, along with every democratically elected position during my medical training. On the outside, I looked like I had it all figured out. Yet, if I'm being honest, I was also entirely burned out and, frankly, quite miserable on the inside. With everything I had accomplished, I wondered why I wasn't happier at the end of my journey. After all those long hours and sleepless nights in training to become a physician, was this really it? Without many answers, I began to self-medicate. I didn't self-medicate with cocaine, heroin, ecstasy, LSD, or marijuana. Instead, I self-medicated through my addiction to what is known as an arrival fallacy, a term coined by Tal Ben-Shahar, a Harvard-trained psychologist. Tal Ben-Shahar described the arrival fallacy phenomenon in an article in the New York Times as an illusion that once we make it, once we attain our goal or reach our destination, we will reach lasting happiness. If you aren't sure whether or not you have ever succumbed to an arrival fallacy, tell me if this sounds familiar. Do you remember feeling that when you got to residency, things will be better than medical school, only to find out that you were burned out in residency? Did you think that burnout in residency would surely get better when you became an attending physician making a physician income? When that didn't work, did you think that getting promoted to partner or advancing in the academic ranks might improve your situation? For those of us who suffer from an arrival fallacy, each time we accomplish something new, it brings a jolt of short-lived satisfaction. Unfortunately, it never seems to last, so our desire to solve dissatisfaction continues. From this place, you may have decided to buy the Dr. House, a nicer car, expensive gadgets and gizmos, designer clothes and handbags, or a dream vacation. All of these purchases were an attempt to find the sustained happiness that seemed to elude you. Like me, you likely found that happiness you experienced was fleeting. The pot of gold you hoped to find at the end of the rainbow wasn't where you thought it would be. The promised land wasn't so promising after all. If you've ever looked for happiness in any of these things and found that life in medicine wasn't all that it was chalked up to be, you likely suffer from an arrival fallacy too. This is called a fallacy for a reason. It isn't true. It turns out that Gertrude Stein had it right when she said, "There is no there." With less and less autonomy over what time I would get home, not feeling like I belonged, either as a member of the team or attached to a deeper sense of purpose at the hospital, and having the typical imposter syndrome that plagues many physicians, I was burning out fast. And my arrival fallacies were the only thing that kept my head above water. There's a problem with this routine, though. It isn't a long-term solution. Once we arrive, the accomplishments, achievements, and purchases lead to a short-lived hit of dopamine without the long-term sustained satisfaction we want. It is a bit like doing high-speed intervals on a hedonic treadmill. While running each interval as fast as we can, we get a short reprieve for our efforts when we finish our interval, only to be forced to go back into the never-ending treadmill shortly thereafter for the next sprint. Quickly, I found out that short-term happiness and long-term fulfillment are not the same. All of my accomplishments were a drug I had become dependent on to keep me from drowning from stress and burnout. When burnout came knocking, only a couple years into my career as an attending physician, I became dependent on the arrival fallacy to escape. I was an arrival fallacy junkie. Then, one day, the supply arrivals dried up. The accomplishments weren't coming as quickly. Buying the doctor house didn't help, nor did the naturally aspirated V8 powered manual transmission sedan that I bought, although it did sound great. With an addiction to accomplishment and my self-worth and fulfillment being attached to it, it didn't take long for me to start drowning when 4, yes, as in the number after 3, assistant program director positions opened up, and I wasn't chosen for any of them despite being qualified for the job and expressing interest. While I found out later that I had been considered for the APD role, the fact was that 4 other people were appointed by departmental leadership, including 2 of my best friends from my residency class. The 4 new APDs were all incredible people, yet to say this stung would be a massive understatement. For years, being a leader in the residency program was the direction I thought my career had been heading, and the door had been slammed in my face. Not once, but 4 times. When my chain of arrivals finally broke in a harsh and sudden way, my demons came out. I was in arrival fallacy withdrawal. My professional autonomy over my career had been stripped from me, and I certainly didn't feel appreciated. I was burning out, and I was starting to have symptoms from it, or so I thought. First, there were the headaches, then my essential tremor started getting worse. Every room felt like a sauna. My wife, Kristen, and I, we were getting into a lot of heated arguments, which was new for us. I started to resent my job. I wasn't sleeping. In fact, I realized that I hadn't slept through the night for more than 10 to 20 days in the previous 12 months. Each night, I'd wake up 3 or 4 times, amped up and unable to fall back asleep. Some of my friends and family thought it was because I had too much on my plate. It turned out this was one of the reasons that I wasn't chosen for the 4 APD positions, in addition to my proclivity for strong opinions about taboo topics like personal finance and burnout. Yet, I had always managed to juggle all of the balls in the air without much difficulty. In the end, something else was going on, which takes us back to the panic attack I experienced on the second hole of the Bermuda Run golf course that fateful day when I ran out of propranolol. After that little white golf ball took hold of my emotions, I went to my family medicine doctor to put it all together. Fortunately, she knew her stuff. The TSH she ordered ended up being undetectable. It was less than 0.1 milliunits per ml. A few weeks later, my endocrinologist diagnosed me with Graves' disease. And at the time, I wasn't sure if my Graves' disease had led to my burnout or if my burnout was uncovered more easily because of my autoimmune disease. Was it the chicken or was it the egg? At this point, I believe it was the latter, and I'm not alone in that theory. In a 2018 observational study published in JAMA, Dr. Song and colleagues took 100,000 individuals who had stress or stress-related disorders and matched them with over 1 million individuals without stress or stress-related disorders. They compared the data to more than 125,000 siblings of the cohort who had not experienced stress or stress-related disorders as well. The question they were seeking to answer was whether someone who experienced continual stress was more or less likely to develop autoimmune disorders like Graves' disease. What they found is that the patients with stress or stress-related disorders had much higher rates of autoimmune disease, including, specifically, thyroid disease. Was the stress from my burnout associated with the Graves' disease or vice versa? In my experiment of N equals 1, I came to a conclusion similar to Dr. Song's after starting my methimazole. With treatment, my symptoms improved. My labs showed that I was euthyroid too. However, despite treatment, my burnout didn't get better, and neither did my arrival fallacy addiction. In fact, they both got worse. I didn't feel like I had professional autonomy. The prior career path I'd been traveling to become an APD was at its end. I started having some trouble with imposter syndrome too. Maybe I just wasn't good enough to be a leader in my department. My personal autonomy was also under attack as I had little control over my time and when I got home each day. My life felt controlled by a constantly growing to-do list, and I only felt temporarily better when I accomplished more. Yet, there were never enough hours in the day to accomplish everything that I needed to get done in order for my arrival fallacy to keep me afloat. As a husband, father, physician, and entrepreneur, I had a hard time keeping up. Even when I'd have a momentary hit of dopamine from an accomplishment, it was short-lived. I was suffering from all of the symptoms of burnout. That's when the anxiety and depression accompanying my burnout became very real for me. As I started to go down, my primary care physician threw me a life preserver called escitalopram, and therapy. This made things better for a bit, but my life outside the public eye was still a train wreck. I felt burned out and completely out of balance. Scarier still, I felt like I didn't belong despite being surrounded by people who loved me. While the escitalopram therapy and becoming euthyroid were all helpful, none of these modalities cured my burnout. Instead, what helped reduce my burnout was something that I was much more skeptical about as a burned out physician, shifting my perspective through coaching. It was because of this skepticism that I initially ignored people's advice to try physician coaching. When I finally decided to try it, coaching would change my life. Eventually, this led me to spend the time and money to become a certified coach myself and to start a physician-only coaching program called the Alpha Coaching Experience, or ACE as the cool kids call it, where we have helped hundreds of doctors defeat their burnout and create a life they love. It's because of this work that I wrote this book, to teach you the concepts we teach our clients in ACE. I fought against coaching for a long time, and as I write this, I realize that you may have the same skepticism I once had. After all, the burnout I was experiencing wasn't my fault, right? It was just the broken medical system that was causing my problem. Like many physicians, I felt that I was the victim of burnout, not the cause of it. In fact, I remember people asking me about this in multiple interviews early in the life of the physician philosopher, and telling them that I thought blaming the victim of burnout was a baseless and a harmful exercise. It was the system that needed to be fixed, not the doctor. So if it wasn't me that needed to change, surely changing my external circumstances was the best course of action. At least, that's what I thought. Changing circumstances. When facing burnout, most physicians think about making a change. They take a new job, go part-time, or think about starting a side gig to make more non-clinical income. This is usually done in an attempt to free themselves from their current situation. A 2020 survey of over 1,200 physicians performed by MD Link showed that 48% of physician respondents were considering a career change. This included 34% of doctors who were considering a change in their practice and 26% who said they were considering retiring, leaving patient care, closing their practice, or quitting medicine to start a new career. By changing their circumstances, these doctors think it will end their suffering. If they can't do that, the least they can do is escape their bad situation for a little while by working somewhere else. It doesn't always work, though. Think about it. Do all doctors who change jobs find the happiness and fulfillment they currently want? Nope. Not even close. In fact, one survey performed by an Atlanta-based recruiting agency found that over 50% of doctors will leave their first job within 3 to 5 years after training. This is despite telling everyone it was a great job when they found it. It isn't just new doctors that think about changing jobs or leaving medicine either. According to an article in the Washington Post, after the pandemic hit, 30% of physicians considered joining the Great Resignation and leaving medicine altogether. Despite these changes, it is common for a physician to change jobs and to end up being just as burned out 6 months after taking the new job. This is what happens when burned out doctors don't spend the time determining what the actual cause of their burnout is before making the change. When we change jobs without doing the necessary thought work, we are treating the symptom, not the disease. As a coaching client, I learned to do the thought work before changing circumstances. That's why I spend the first half of this book describing the problem and our need to master our mindset first. Like in medicine, it is necessary to make the diagnosis before we can determine a successful treatment plan. In addition to that, when it comes to burnout, the thought work is often sufficient in and of itself to allow doctors to fall back in love with medicine without having to change jobs at all. When we put in the thought work, it can empower us to be able to deal with any and every situation, no matter how bad. Evident in Nelson Mandela's story and the teachings of many Stoic philosophers is the idea that external situations may be out of our control. Many stop at this realization and then wallow in self-pity. After realizing that sometimes there is nothing they can do about things outside their control, all hope seems lost. It doesn't have to be this way, though. We do not have to let external circumstances stop us in our tracks. And odds are that if you're listening to this book, then you aren't going to stop there either. Why? Because you're likely sick and tired of being sick and tired. You are a brave and courageous physician. You're looking for a different way to view the problems in your life, including the burnout that is wreaking havoc in your soul. You aren't going to give up that easily. If you are listening to this book, you recognize that while we cannot control our external circumstances, there is one thing we can always control: our focus. Not all prisoners are in prison. Mandela taught us that we can work to change a broken system, apartheid in his situation, while we simultaneously refuse to be broken ourselves. Said differently, you can fix a broken system while you simultaneously refuse to let it control you. How we react is determined by our perspectives, paradigms, and narratives. Like Mandela, doctors may not be able to control the circumstances and situations around us in medicine. We cannot control the broken nature of the electronic medical record system or the well-meaning yet intolerable administrators who buy us coffee thinking that a little caffeine is going to solve our burnout. Doctors cannot stop the constant micromanagement insurance companies cause that prevent us from caring for our patients. Despite this, we don't have to let the broken system control us. We can rage against this broken machine because medicine is broken, while we simultaneously control our internal response. The administrators and insurance companies can see us as a cog in the wheel of this machine or just a number on a balance sheet. Yet it is up to us to control who we are and what we do when tough situations arise. The point is this. We have two choices when faced with external circumstances that we see as unfair or unjust. The first choice is that we can do what most do and choose to label ourselves as a victim of a bad situation or circumstance. We can wallow in the defeat and misery caused by a broken medical system. We can bide our time until the system magically changes or until we are able to retire. Or we can choose to be the hero in a broken situation. Victim or hero? The choice is yours. Do we really want to self-identify as a victim? No, we don't, and it will not lead to the change we want. How do I know? Because when I was burned out, I labeled myself as a victim, and I've seen countless other physicians do the same. There were months on end that I sat on my back porch drinking an IPA while complaining to my wife about the state of medicine. While it felt good to commiserate and to blame everything on something external, labeling myself as a victim and commiserating did not help. I wasn't able to move forward. Think about it. Do any doctors who assume the role of victim really defeat their moral injury? No, they don't. In fact, this is exactly what the system wants, for doctors to remain silent while the insurance companies in control continue to reap the rewards. Just like the prisoners in the Stanford prison experiment who became depressed and broken down even when other study participants assumed the role of prison guards. Like the Stanford prisoners, you can choose bitterness, anger, and defeat. You can change jobs, go part-time, or try to create the financial freedom you need to leave medicine completely. In so doing, you have positioned yourself as the bitter victim trying to break out of jail. And this, my friends, is the problem. When we choose the role of victim, we have already lost in the most important way. We have lost control of our thoughts, feelings, and the way that we show up in this world. We have chosen the way of bitterness and anger that Mandela warned us against. There's a better way, one that provides hope instead of burnout. Like Mandela, we can choose to position ourselves as the hero of our story instead of assuming the role of the victim. Many of our physician clients come into coaching expecting the coaches to tell them how to make the changes they need in life to be happy. Maybe they think we'll teach them how to chart more efficiently, make more money, or transition jobs in order to find fulfillment in medicine. That's not what happens, though. After our clients learn the skill of mastering their internal focus created by their thoughts, most of them end up doing the opposite of changing their jobs or leaving medicine. Most end up falling back in love with medicine right where they are, without needing to change their circumstances at all. This is why we always teach clients that before they change jobs, go part-times, or start a physician side gig to create non-clinical income, they must first do the thought work to make the right diagnosis. They must spend the time determining the cause of their burnout. Just like we can only prescribe the best treatment for a patient when we make an accurate diagnosis, we must make decisions based on the strength of a proper mindset instead of from the scarcity created by a bad environment. As doctors, we often feel trapped in medicine by moral injury, or we feel that reality of working in medicine hasn't lived up to the dream we hoped it would. We feel unappreciated, unheard, or overworked. We feel we have no control over the administrators and insurance companies that seem to rule our world. Yet, when we get home late for the umpteenth time, when the charting seems endless and we are overwhelmed by massive amounts of debt or non-competes in our contract, when conflict of interest policies seem unfair, we still have a choice. We can realize that we are only a victim if we choose to be. We can stand firm knowing that we are strong, smart, intelligent, resilient, and enough. Right now. Just the way that we are. What if the journey is the destination? Growing up, Rhett's father was a physician. He was also an alcoholic who made some poor life choices. During Rhett's adolescence, his dad decided to uproot his family and make a career transition. Rhett's father wasn't happy with his job in medicine, so instead of doing the thought work to figure out why, he tried to escape his situation like most burned out doctors do. In the end, the new job didn't work out for Rhett's father. That's when he looked for answers in the bottom of a bottle. Rhett's physician father lost his job and eventually his life after succumbing to alcoholism. That's when his family went through hard financial times. This consequential decision to change jobs was permanently imprinted on Rhett's mind when he became a physician himself. Early in his career, Rhett discovered the financial independence retire early, or FIRE, community. For the uninformed, the FIRE movement is predicated on the idea that people spend much less than they earn, save the difference, and achieve financial independence very early. This has led some doctors to retire in their 30s and 40s. With his sights set squarely on being able to achieve FIRE and leave his job in medicine, Rhett moved to a rural area of the country where they pay well above the national average. He was making great money and great progress towards his financial goals, yet there was a problem. Both he and his family were unhappy outside of the big city. Nonetheless, he didn't want to make the same mistakes that his father had and decided he would rather be unhappy in his job in medicine and be able to accomplish his financial goals. Rhett stayed at his job as an intensivist because it paid well and provided the financial security that he desperately desired. That's when Rhett came into coaching to discuss his job in medicine, the marriage problems he was having because of it, and his family's overall discontent with their situation. On one call, I asked Rhett, why stay in a job that you don't like in a small rural town where your wife cannot finish her doctoral training and that your family doesn't enjoy? The answer didn't take long. If I stay in this job for 5 years, I'll be able to hit fire and retire from medicine, he said. If I move closer to the city, I'll make less money and delay our financial independence. Rhett was letting his father's financial failures control his family's life. He had a victim mindset. After a series of coaching calls, Rhett came to realize that he didn't have to let his past, which he couldn't control, determine his future, which he could control. Rhett needed thought work to reclaim his autonomy. That's when I asked him, Rhett, would you rather be miserable working in a place in a job that you and your family don't like so that you can retire from medicine in 5 years, or move to a job closer to the city where you feel like you belong and take the risk that it might delay your retirement to 10 years? What I was asking Rhett to realize that getting to fire was an arrival fallacy. Getting to financial independence faster wasn't the answer to being happier. He was making himself and his family miserable on the journey to get there. What if he could learn to enjoy the journey such that he never wanted to make it to his destination? What if he played the infinite game instead of the finite game? What if in fact the journey was the destination? When he thought about this, he quickly realized he would rather work in a job he actually liked in a location that was better for his family for 10 years than to destroy himself in a job he hated for 5 years just so he could retire early. He was starting to master the autonomy, belonging, and competence of a self-determined physician. These are all topics I will cover in this book. On our last call together, Rhett was sitting in his new BMW that he had been waiting to buy for a long time but refused to purchase because it would slow down his financial journey. Rhett started to see all the things in his life that he had been limiting, all for the sake of being able to retire as early as possible from medicine. In his new BMW 3 Series convertible, he shared the big news that after a lot of coaching and discussions with his wife, he and his family decided to move to the big city where they would be closer to friends and family, and where they felt like they belonged. Ironically, it turned out that his assumption about earning less money in a better location didn't end up being true either. The job he found was desperately in need of his specialty, so Rhett ended up with more non-clinical time and more money. His wife was able to take the steps she needed to finish her doctoral degree, and his family and friends were nearby. In the end, he got to have his cake and eat it too. Like Nelson Mandela, Rhett refused to be the victim of his situation while simultaneously standing up for the change that he and his family needed. What you'll discover. While this book is meant to empower the individual physician who is struggling with burnout, there's also a lot of work to be done on the systematic and systemic front, which is why I will outline the problems that exist. Truthfully, until we create cultures that weed out systematic causes of burnout in medicine, outlined in the beginning of this book, the problems physicians have will continue to exist. The good news, however, is that you can improve your individual situation in the meantime, regardless of how bad medicine seems. If you want to continue to label yourself as a victim and wallow in your burned out self-defeat, then this is not the book for you. However, if you want to learn how to become the hero of your story, or learn how to bite your thumb at the medical system that mistreats medical professionals, or if you're willing to transition from burned out to the badass boss of your life, then stick with me. You've found the book for you. This book then is broken into 4 parts. In part 1, we will outline the current state of medicine and the systematic problems that ail the burned out doctor when hospitals choose to focus on profit instead of on the medical professionals on the front line. In part 2, we will dive into the impact these systems have on individual doctors. In part 3, we'll discuss the tools I teach our physician clients to defeat their individual burnout and reclaim their autonomy. And finally, in part 4, I'll provide some powerful paradigms that doctors can use while fighting in the medical arena. So I'll ask you, what is your story? What is holding you back from making the change that you know you need to make? Are you telling yourself that you're helpless to remedy your situation? Are you giving your autonomy to someone else? You don't have to. You're not helpless. You are strong, courageous, and brave enough to figure this out. Let me show you the way. Start before you're ready. Start by starting. Start now.